G'day guys, welcome to our little video discussing the snake method on the Weber kettle. This is basically your beginner's guide to smoking. If you've got a Weber kettle and you want to do low and slow, you don't need a big offset smoker, you don't need a Kamado grill, you don't need a pellet. You just need the good old trusty Weber kettle and some charcoal briquettes. So the idea behind this cook is we want to maintain a constant temperature at about 110, 120 degrees Celsius, or your 225 to 250 degrees Fahrenheit. And we want to maintain that for a really long period of time. And the way we do that is we set up our charcoal in a very distinct fashion. It's called the snake method because, as you can see, we're setting up our charcoal in a bit of a snake, or almost like a wick or a set of dominoes, however you want to describe it, but snake method is the common terminology. What we're going to have is eventually a bunch of lit coals here, which are going to provide the initial heat, and then these coals here will slowly ignite and burn through over the period of the cook to maintain the heat in our Weber kettle. Now, we're not talking a really high temperature, so as you can see, you don't need a lot of coals burning at once to maintain a stable temperature. Effectively, this is a two layered snake. Depending on what the ambient temperature is outside, you might need to put a couple of extra coals going around the edge of the snake, or even some less coals, but this is how I like to set it up. So it's pretty easy. I'm just going to add a little bit more to this snake. Right, so you want each of the briquettes that you place to touch the last one that you put into place, like so. And then usually I prefer to have a little bit more fuel in case we want to just bump the temperature up a little bit more, so I like a little second tier on top of this snake here, and that's about it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and light up about 12 to 15 briquettes, get them nice and hot, and then we're going to talk about wood, and then we'll get the snake burning. So got our coals and our briquettes in the chimney starter here. They're just slowly coming up. We're going to be using a little bit of smoking wood. At the end of the day, one of the reasons why you use the snake method, the charcoal provides the fuel and the heat source, but you can pick whatever smoking wood you want to add flavour to the cook. So got some beautiful natural smoke chunks of cherry wood here. You know, I figured while I was doing a tutorial video, may as well cook some ribs. So they're just in there warming up. They just want to get to a little bit higher temperature before I throw them on direct coals, just so they burn a little bit better. So we'll come back soon when these coals are nice and lit. Okay, so we got our briquettes lit up here, looking nice and hot. So what we're going to do is we're just going to dump these at the start of our snake. So we've had the chimney starter firing them up here. Okay, so a bit of dust off there. I'll just grab my tongs here. Just going to manipulate these a little bit because we just want them starting to make contact with those unlit coals, so they start our snake going along nicely. And that's sort of roughly how I'd have it set up. So get one of these cherry chunks and put it on the lit coals, if I can manage that. So one chunk will get our smoke going along quite nicely. We're going to want a little bit more smoke throughout the cook though, so I'll place these next couple here. Now roughly this snake that I've set up does about half the Weber. That's going to be about sort of 6 to 8 hours worth of cooking there. It's actually remarkable how little charcoal you need to get something like this cooking for a really long time. Just to talk a little bit about smoke, so a lot of the time you hear about thin blue smoke. So a lot of the really flavouring chemicals that occur when wood is smoking happen at a very high temperature. So what we want is we want sort of a smaller but more intensely burning fire, which will offer basically the same result in terms of creating ambient temperature in the Weber as a large but dull fire. So if we have a small intense burning fire, we burn hotter, achieve the same temperature in the pit, and at the same time the wood burns at a high temperature, which means it releases a lot of those chemicals gets through that pyrolysis phase of burning, and releases all the nice smoke flavour that we want. So a lot of the time white smoke is just burning off the moisture content in the wood, and that's literally smoke caused by water vapour. So if we get a nice intense burning smoke here, we're starting to see a couple of flames there, that's perfect. So we'll just leave the whole lid off probably for about another 2 minutes, then I'll put the grate in, put our temp probe in, and then shut the lid. Okay, so at the moment got the grill rack in place now. I'm not sure if you can see there, but look, I've got the bottom vents completely open at the moment. We still want good airflow. You can see I put my temp probe in place. That's over here. Now we're generating heat and smoke over here, but obviously we're trying to set this up to cook at a low temperature, so where we're actually going to be placing the meat is somewhere over here. So that's where my probe wants to be, because I want to know the temperature where I'm actually cooking. Now I'll explain why a temp probe is a good idea in just a second. So what we're going to do is grab our Weber lid and put it on top. Now, as you can see, this is a relatively new Weber. It does have a temperature dial, but the problem is where that's positioned is directly above where my coals are sitting. So the temperature in this side of the Weber where the coals are is going to be quite different to the temperature on this side of the Weber where we're going to be cooking our meat. Now, you could say, yeah, well, why don't you put the thermometer on the side where the meat's cooking? The problem with that is what we actually want to do is have our exhaust vent on the side of the cooker where our meat is, to draw the nice smoky airflow over our meat as it exits the cooker. So a bit of a design flaw. Sometimes the Weber thermometer is good enough, but most of the time I prefer to just use a digital thermometer, which I'm just going to turn on right now. So what we're going to do is basically let this get up to temp. Top air vent is always going to be open here. I'm going to monitor my pit temperature with the digital thermometer, and then I'm just going to adjust my bottom vents once I'm getting close up to temperature to choke it down and get our cooking temperature stable. As you can see, a bit of that white smoke at the moment. The wood's maybe not quite hot enough. So give it about 10 minutes and I reckon we're going to be pretty ready to put the meat in. Okay, so pretty happy our pit's up to temperature, and sorry, it's a little bit like a bit of a disco here with a bit of flashing lights, but 252 is what that probe is measuring. We got good smoke coming out, but you have a look here at that Weber thermometer dial and it's measuring 350. So you can see why that pit probe is pretty essential. But anyway, we're up to temp. 250 is about what I want to be smoking at. Smelling pretty good. Gonna take the lid off here and see what we're looking at. So start to have some of those new coals igniting and starting the rest of that snake going. So what we've got is the perfect opportunity to put our meat in. I've got some juicy baby back ribs here. I'm just going to put them on like that. Now at the moment they're away from our heat source, but as this cook goes on, we're going to have to probably move that rack around just to stay a bit further away from the coals as possible, because we don't want a real hot spot too close to the meat as those coals move around. So we'll just swing that grate so the meat's basically as far as possible away from the coals at any one time. So I'm going to put the lid back on, and we're going to have the vents directly over the top of the lid, so it's drawing all that nice smoke flavour and bringing it up through over the top of the meat and smoking and cooking our meat. So airflow is king, temperature control is king in a cook like this. So I've got the bottom vents pretty much drawn back down to almost a minimum, and hopefully that's just going to sit quite lovely. Now this isn't a rib cooking video, this is just setting up a snake method video. I might do another little snapshot later of me tucking into some of these juicy ribs, but hopefully this has given you a good insight on how to set up a snake in the Weber. And look, at the end of the day, anyone who's looking to get into a little bit of charcoal and smoking meat type of cooking, the Weber kettle, I always will recommend at the bottom of my heart that it is the best place to start in terms of learning to control your fire. And you can cook anything in one of these. You can cook brisket, beef ribs, pork ribs, lamb shoulder, whatever you want to do. You can't always cook huge volumes of the meat because you can only fit so much inside a kettle, but at the same time, to feed a family or some friends and enjoy learning how to learn to cook low and slow, the Weber kettle is a fantastic place to start. So hope you enjoyed this video. Like and subscribe, and I'd really appreciate it. Cheers guys, bye. Okay guys, so just a little after credits extra. This is what I'm talking about thin blue smoke. This is where you get maximum flavour, none of that harsh smoke, bitter taste. It's all those chemicals being released at a high temperature where it's almost barely invisible, and you might not even be able to see it on the camera, but the smell that's coming out of this Weber right now is perfect, and that's because we've got a small intense fire burning at a high temperature, getting that wood combusting at a high temperature. So anyway, just showing you a little bit of the key ingredients that I've used in this cook. Clean heat briquettes, natural smoke, cherry wood, well seasoned cherry wood. The key is, guys, has to be seasoned well, cut and then reduced to a certain minimum moisture content for best results when burning. Anyway, in about 20 minutes, 255, still sitting along lovely because we set it up well. Anyway, cheers.